The Pokemon Company have done an amazing job providing players with pre-constructed decks, whether you just want to learn how to play the game or you want to play in tournaments. And today we've got some breaking news and quite possibly the most exciting line of pre-constructed decks we've ever seen. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about these new rival battle decks. Let's start with some high-level info. This is a whole new line of pre-constructed decks. We've never seen anything like this outside of Japan before. So this is a really exciting drop for us. This is coming out on May 16th, 2025. There's two different decks. We've got the Marnie one and the Steven one, and these are going to be priced at $14.99 US. Each Pokemon pre-constructed deck is rated on a scale of 1 to 3 in terms of complexity. Level 1s are for absolute beginners. Level 3s are for those looking to play in tournaments. These new rival decks sit in the level 2 category, so they're somewhere in the middle. And if you're looking to compare based on products we've seen in the past, the closest equivalent to these is the deluxe battle decks. And I'll flash a deluxe battle deck here on the screen. I think these are actually notably better than those deluxe battle decks, and I'll get into why in just a sec. Actually, let's get into one of those reasons right now. One of the big things that sets this product line apart from the other battle decks we've seen is that these ones have exclusive promos. Now, we have seen exclusive promos in the level 1 decks. The level 3 decks don't really get exclusive promos, but we've never seen art rares as part of the promo package. So in the Marnie deck, you're getting the Marnie's Morpeko, and in the Steven deck, you're getting the Steven's Beldum. And these are absolutely stunning artworks. And the only way you can get these cards is by buying these decks. And I think both of these arts are spectacular. And just as a collector, I would probably pick these up just to get these cards in my collection. But you're also getting a deck here, and there are going to be people that will buy this deck who will never play the Pokemon trading card game, and that's fine. But if you are looking to play the Pokemon trading card game, then you've got a whole entire deck that you can play with, and that's fantastic too. The most exciting part of this reveal is that this is very closely in line with Japan's pre-constructed decks. They have been releasing a ton of cool pre-constructed decks for years now, and this is the first time we actually got decks that are almost perfectly aligned to what they've released in Japan. Usually we get maybe some of the cards or the general idea of a deck with wildly different card choices and all that, but the Steven decks and the Marnie decks are almost the same. We have some minor card differences that I've listed directly below me, but in the grand scheme of things, these are basically the same product with the same promo cards, and I think it's awesome that we are matching Japan on that front, because I think the Japanese version of this deck looks awesome, and the international version is awesome as well. If anything, I actually think the version outside of Japan is a little better from a gameplay standpoint based on the card differences listed below. The differences between the decks is the same across both Marnie and Steven. In the international version of Marnie and Steven, we are getting +3 Drayton, 1 extra copy of Buddy Poffin, 1 extra copy of Rare Candy, and 1 extra copy of XP Share. And then between the two decks, we're getting different versions of Professor's Research. In exchange, the Japanese versions have 2 extra copies of Iono and 4 extra copies of Nemona. Now, losing the 2 extra copies of Iono is a little unfortunate, but Nemona is a pretty bad card, so I would gladly take the international versions of these decks over the Japanese ones any day of the week. Here's a look at some of the accessories you will get in the package. I should note here that this playmat that's pictured is paper, and the tokens the damage counter tokens are paper as well, though the coin is probably plastic based on my past experience with this level of product. It's probably a plastic coin, and the deck box is made of paper. Here's a look at the Steven version. The accessories are very similar, except the playmat and the coin and the deck box are for Steven versus for Marnie. I think both of these look fantastic. And here's a quick glance at the back of the box for both of them. In particular, I wanted to focus on the fact that the deck lists for both of these are listed on the back. I'm not going to make you squint to look at these. We're actually going to look at both of these deck lists in detail. We'll look at Marnie's deck list first, and the linchpin of this deck is the Grimmsnarl, where it has the ability Punk Up, where when you evolve up to Grimmsnarl, you get to accelerate 5 dark energy to your Marnie's Pokemon in any way you like. This is going to be absolutely massive for you because you can pretty much set up your attackers for potentially the rest of the game, or you can power up one of your attackers that needs a lot of energy to potentially swing for one-hit KO damage. Though Grimmsnarl itself is maybe not the best attacker. Its Shadow Bullet attack for 2 dark energy does 180 damage, and you do 30 damage to the bench. 180 is going to be enough to one-hit KO a smaller support multi-prize Pokemon like a Squawkabilly, but you're not really knocking out any multi-prize Pokemon that are attackers in the game. So its damage output is a bit underwhelming, to be honest. In theory, Marnie's Morpeko is the heavy hitter of the deck. Spiked Wheels for 3 colorless energy does 20 damage and 40 more damage for each dark energy attached to this Pokemon. If you evolve up to Grimmsnarl one time and attach all of that energy off of that Punk Up ability to your Marnie's Morpeko, you would then be doing 220 damage. And if you attach even more, you could get to a point where you're theoretically one-hit KOing everything in the game. However, it's going to take a lot to get your Marnie's Morpeko up to a point where it is taking those big one-hit KOs, and Morpeko only has 70 HP, so this is getting immediately knocked out on the following turn, and you can only pop Punked Up so much before you are kind of out of luck and can't accelerate any more energy. So even though this does theoretically have the potential to one-hit KO those big basics and potentially scale up from there, the fact that it's super squishy and it takes a ton of energy to get this Morpeko rolling makes it a bit underwhelming as well. Marnie's Scraggy has the attack Crunch, where for 2 dark and a colorless, you do 50 damage and discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. I don't think this is particularly strong, though discarding an energy might be beneficial in very specific use cases. Like, for example, you knock a legacy energy off of your opponent's Pokemon and now you're taking the full amount of prizes versus the -1. That could be cool, but otherwise 3 energy for 50 is not great. If we evolve from Scraggy to Scrafty, we get a bit stronger of an attack with Wild Tackle for 2 dark and a colorless energy. We're doing 160 damage, and this Pokemon also does 30 damage to itself. Now, we don't like to do 30 damage to ourselves. 160 for 3 is, on a single prizer, is not bad. We are, again, knocking out something like a Squawkabilly EX, but a lot of meta-relevant Pokemon are not going down at 160, with the trade-off being this is a stage 1, it's 120 HP. I think my big problem with the deck, and I think we're at the point we can talk about it now. I love the energy acceleration from Grimmsnarl, but the attackers are kind of underwhelming, and we kind of just don't have that heavy hitter to make this a serious contender in competitive play. I think for the context of casual play or playing these decks, pre-constructed decks against one another or against others, I think these are awesome, and I think they're a lot more cohesive than some of the deluxe battle decks we've gotten in the past. But if we're really being nitpicky here and trying to compare it against some of the more competitive decks in the scene, I think the damage output is just a little lacking. Marnie's Purloin has the Sharp Nail attack for 1 dark energy. You're doing 20 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is a Pokemon EX, this attack does 40 more damage. This is actually not that bad if they've got an EX in the active to start and you've got this Purloin. Doing 60 damage off the top is kind of decent, especially since your damage output across the rest of your attackers is a bit low. You could potentially soften something up for a big KO later. Marnie's Liepard has the same attack, though it costs a little more with 2 dark energy, and you're doing 70 base damage instead of 40. And you're also doing an extra 70 if you're attacking a Pokemon EX. So 140, even better. I still don't think it's going to be enough to really make this deck a true contender, but I do love the synergy between these Pokemon. Grimmsnarl, again, accelerating all that energy to all of these different attackers. I just wish that it kind of had a better attacker in the deck. For trainer cards, we've got 4 copies of Professor's Research, where you get to discard your hand, draw 7 cards. This is one of the best supporter cards of all time, so really awesome that we get to get 4 copies of it here. Drayton is a card that we don't see much right now, but in post-rotation play in Japan, this card is seeing more action. It says, look at the top 7 cards of your deck and you can reveal a Pokemon and a trainer card you find there and put them into your hand and shuffle the other cards back into your deck. You're not always going to find the right combination of cards in that top 7, but if you're able to grab something like the Grimmsnarl plus Rare Candy, that can really help you set up much quicker. So I definitely see the potential in this card. Boss's Orders is one of the best and most powerful cards in the game, letting you switch your opponent's active Pokemon with one on the bench. Iono is the premier hand disruption card in the Pokemon TCG, where both players shuffle their hands, put it to the bottom of their deck, and then draw equal to the number of prize cards they have remaining. This can be especially deadly towards the end game if your opponent only has 1 or 2 prizes remaining, and then you Iono them down to a terrible hand. Spikemuth Gym is a great consistency card, allowing you to grab a Marnie's Pokemon from your deck and put it into your hand. Ultra Ball allows you to discard 2 cards and grab any Pokemon from your deck. Buddy Buddy Poffin is a great way of establishing your bench. Lets you search your deck for up to 2 basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less and put them onto your bench. And between the Impidimp and the Morpeko and the Scraggy, this is going to be a great way of building our bench. Also the Purloin as well. Rare Candy is a quintessential card in the Pokemon TCG, allowing us to evolve our basic Pokemon into our stage 2s without needing that middle evolution. This allows us to go from Impidimp to Grimmsnarl in 1 less turn. Switch lets us switch our active Pokemon with 1 on the bench. Whether you are trying to hide a damaged Pokemon or bring in a heavy hitter, Switch is a great card for moving Pokemon around the board. Energy Recycler lets us shuffle 5 basic energy cards from our discard pile into our deck. This is actually a card that rotated out not that long ago, and it's actually coming back as part of this set. Really glad to see Energy Recycler return. Super Rod allows us to recover Pokemon and basic energy from our discard pile and put it back into our deck. Really nice card for recovering those pieces, though I wish we could have gotten a Night Stretcher or 2 so that we can get those cards immediately back into our hand versus back in the deck. XP Share helps us conserve energy. When one of our Pokemon is knocked out, we can move one of the energy off of the KO'd Pokemon to the Pokemon that has XP Share on it. In particular, this can allow us to move energy to that Morpeko so that it's swinging for even more damage on that follow-up turn. Last but not least, we've got 14 Dark Energy, which I think is way too much. I don't know what I would put in there instead. I think, yeah, you definitely want an A-Spec in here. Some Night Stretchers would be good. I haven't thought too much about what cards I would add, but I do have an example list that performed well in Japan that we can refer to. These decks just came out in Japan, so there's not that many results for them, but this one did do decently well, finishing in 6th place at a City League event. And at a glance, we're not going to go through every single card here, but just at a glance, we see we have a slightly thicker line of the Grimmsnarl. I think we have 1 less of the, is it Morgrim, the middle one? And we have 1 extra Grimmsnarl. The deck comes with 2, but this upgraded version has 3 Grimmsnarl in it. We still have the Morpekos. We have a Badoo here to item lock our opponents so that we slow the game down, so we have more opportunities to set up. Pheasantipity EX to draw cards after one of our Pokemon was KO'd. Pecharunt, I think, is the coolest tech here because it lets you switch a dark Pokemon into the active and poison them. And you combine that with the Binding Mochi that we have all the way down here, and poison Pokemon do 40 more damage. So all of that talk that I was saying about the damage output on this deck being a little underwhelming, it becomes notably better because of this Pecharunt and Binding Mochi combo. Another cool tech I really like in this deck is Survival Brace, where if one of your Pokemon would have been KO'd from full health, they actually survive the hit. And in particular, the Morpeko is going to benefit greatly from this because this is going to get KO'd instantly every single time. But with Survival Brace, you tank a hit and then you can put even more energy on to help scale this to the point where this Morpeko can one-hit KO anything. Now let's look at Steven's deck list, and we're going to gloss over the trainer cards that we already looked at in the Marnie deck. They're actually very similar, which I don't necessarily mind because structurally they're pretty similar, but there are some key differences, and of course the Pokemon are completely different, so let's dive in. Steven's Metagross is a beefy Stage 2 Pokemon with 340 HP, which is tied for the most natural HP we've seen in any Pokemon ever. Its Metal Stomp attack is a little underwhelming. 1 metal and 2 colorless for 200 damage is going to knock out a number of multi-prize support Pokemon, but it's going to fall short in knocking out the multi-prize attackers, the big basics, if you will. But it does make up for it with high HP, and we do have ways of making that HP even higher, as well as this really awesome ability X-Boot, where once during your turn you can accelerate a Psychic Energy and a Metal Energy to one of your Psychic or Metal Pokemon. So you can use this to power up the Metagross really fast or power up another attacker. An attacker you could power up is Steven's Skarmory, which we have 2 copies of in the deck. You can use Razor Wing for 2 colorless, does 30 damage. It's not very good. We also have Sonic Double here for 2 metal and a colorless, where you do 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. So you can attack the active, or you could attack the bench, or both at the same time. I love that flexibility. I love an attack that can snipe the bench. 50 damage is a bit too low. You're only really knocking out a Beldum with this, and you're not even knocking out a lot of the basic evolution Pokemon like a Charmander or anything like that. So it's a bit underwhelming, and I'd probably take this card out if I was customizing this deck. Steven's Baltoy has a cool attack in Summoning Sign, where you can search your deck for 2 basic Steven's Pokemon and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. There will be instances where you could use this to help further establish your board, especially if for some reason you don't get the Buddy Poffins or anything like that. So I don't necessarily hate this as an attack. Its second attack, Psychic Sphere for 20. No, that's not good. Steven's Claydol gives us some interesting offensive options. Eerie Light for 1 energy does 20 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now confused, giving us potentially more time to stall and set up, because at that point when they attack they have to flip a coin, and if they hit tails, then they do damage to themselves and the attack whiffs. Meanwhile, Clay Burst for 2 Psychic and a colorless does 220 damage, and you discard all energy from this Pokemon. You, at this point, 220, you're knocking out a lot of the big basics, though you're gonna fall short on something like an Iron Hands or a Roaring Moon. But 220 is a much better number than the numbers we have seen from a number of these other attackers. And discarding all the energy is actually not necessarily the worst, because if you somehow survive a hit with this Claydol, you can just accelerate energy again off the Metagross, because it's once during your turn, not like once when you evolve. So being able to reload this pretty easily is pretty great. Carbink gives us a defensive boost where when Carbink is in play, Steven's Pokemon take 30 less damage. So that 340 effectively becomes 370 HP, and there's pretty much nothing in the game that is going to one-hit KO our Metagross at that point. Almost all of the trainer cards between Marnie and Steven are pretty much the same, with the exception of the stadiums. And Steven gets Granite Cave, where Steven's Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's, take 30 less damage from attacks from the opponent's Pokemon. So this also stacks with the Carbink, so you're potentially taking minus 60 damage on each attack if both of these are in play, which is a actually kind of decent way of compensating for the slight lack of damage power in your attacker. So if you're able to survive a bit longer, you're potentially swinging for more turns, and hopefully that gets you through the end of each game. Like the Marnie deck, the Steven deck hasn't been out for very long in Japan, so there's not that many examples of tournament level lists. But I did grab this 5th place list, and I think this one is pretty cool. We're going to look at it at a high level. We've got the 3-2-2 line of Metagross and a couple of other attackers. We take out the Skarmory, we take out the Claydol, we replace it with a Farigiraf EX, which does okay damage while also walling off attacks from basic Pokemon. We have Beldum to item lock our opponents. We have Clefairy EX, which can swing for big damage while also hitting Dragon-type Pokemon for weakness, and Steven's Metagross can power this up pretty quickly as well. Even Mew EX, usually it's just a draw engine, but you can attack with that genome hacking as well, because Steven's Metagross can power that up very quickly. While I don't necessarily think these are the strongest decks we've seen from the Pokemon Company, I think these are fantastic products, especially relative to the deluxe battle decks that this is sort of replacing. I think that over the last few years, Pokemon's deluxe battle decks have been pretty disappointing and haven't given players much reason to buy them. They don't have exclusive cards. They're also not particularly strong, and they don't really synergize with anything else, or like even within the cards in their own decks, they kind of just don't play very well. I think that even though the Marnie deck and the Metagross deck aren't the strongest deck, and I've pointed out some things I would improve if I were upgrading them, I think out of the box, these are much better than anything we've seen from the deluxe battle line in the last few years. In particular, I love the fact that the feature Pokemon here, Metagross and Grimmsnarl, have built-in energy acceleration, so it's much easier to get your offense rolling versus the other deluxe battle decks we've seen in the past. The overall competitive ceiling remains to be seen, and yes, from a out of the box, I think these are very squarely intermediate tier decks, but I think they're the best intermediate tier decks we've seen in quite some time. I think you have to go all the way back to like the Sword and Shield era when we got Rapid Strike Urshifu as a league battle deck, a level 2 league battle deck. Like, we're going back years at this point. So I think if you're looking for an intermediate level deck, I think these are awesome. If you're looking to get those promo cards, yeah, definitely pick this up because this is the only place you can get them. And also you could use this as an opportunity to learn how to play the Pokemon trading card game, which is awesome for that as well. I'm really excited for these, and I think I'm probably going to pick both of these up. One, because I think the promo cards look fantastic, and two, I think that the decks are decently strong for level 2 decks, and in particular, I'm excited to try the Stevens deck and see what I can cook up with that Metagross EX. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think of these decks. Before I go, some quick plugs. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website inthirdperson.com for more articles, videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.